Hello and welcome to a Arena FPS Reflex release video. We're going to be having a quick look at basically the entirety of Reflex as a whole and our thoughts on basically the state of the game in current year 2017. So, big exciting news, Reflex has been released, and we kind of called it back in the Christmas matchmaking video, I believe, where we were saying how, it's time for the game to get towards release with the matchmaking patch, and with this patch they've added bots and a couple of other things. We don't need to go into great detail, but it's finally here. It's been a long time coming.
It has been a long journey.
Yeah, and we've kind of been covering the game since I think our video channel started, like when the game was first put on early access, around that time.
Yeah, Reflex was kind of like one of the games that it kind of like indicated a resurgence of the scene. That was kind of one of the driving forces behind it and kind of why all this started.
Yeah. And it was a bit of a trickle at first, and there's a few things that popped up and kind of disappeared in the meanwhile. But Reflex has stuck to their guns and really kind of pushed forward with the development. And I think they've come out with something really great. Now, what is Reflex? For those of you that aren't really too au fait with Arena FPS, and maybe you've seen like the new announcements for Reflex and the new announcements for Quake Champions, and you're thinking, what is this game? It looks a little bit like Quake 3. And you're right, it's based on a mod for Quake 3 Arena, which was called CPMA. And some of the developers for CPMA moved on about 5-6 years ago now, a couple of years before the actual Kickstarter started, and put together Reflex as we know it, or Reflex Arena as it's called now on Steam. They wanted to create a more competitive Quake 3. Now, you can argue till the cows come home whether it is more competitive or not, but it is a faster game. The armors are different, the mega health spawning is different. There's quite a few nuanced things which we don't need to go into detail right now, but if you want to look it up, the information is there. And really the most important one, I think, is the speed, right? It is a game with air control, which means that when you jump in the air and you kind of just hold A or D and move your mouse, you'll kind of turn in that direction, whereas in Quake Live, you'll kind of just go in a straight line mostly, and you might kind of slightly drift.
Yeah, like you literally have to stop and turn in Quake Live. That's one of the huge differences. There's also a bunch of like interesting little movement tricks based on double jumps, basically, where you can perform them on stairs and teleporters and ceilings, and basically anything that lets you jump twice in a short frame of time to gain extra height.
You gain 50% extra height with every subsequent jump within, I think it's half a second of a previous jump.
Yeah. I think it's 400 milliseconds.
400 milliseconds. It's around that time frame. So basically, if you jump on a box and then you jump again within 400 milliseconds, you'll gain more height than you would off a regular jump. And this can be chained to triple jumps and really interesting movement around maps, which is kind of, to the players who are interested in the game, the selling point to quite a large extent, because it really creates this free-flowing game with a lot of emphasis on movement and skillful movement as well. It's a very large aspect of the game. And because of that, Reflex and CPMA, which came before it, are very much like, there's a huge emphasis on mechanics, more so than Quake Live. I mean, to the untrained eye, Quake Live looks like a really fast-paced, mechanical game, but actually compared to some other games in Arena FPS, like Reflex, like CPMA, like Warsaw, for example, they are far faster and like they have far more mechanical emphasis, and they weigh the importance of how you should play and how you should approach the game in different ways. And a lot of people really enjoy this. They see this as like the core essence of what Arena FPS is, right? So as well as that, it's general kind of Quake 3 Arena style combat. So there's a lot of emphasis on pickups and timing. Getting the armors is very important. There's a slightly different system where the armors are tiered, so green isn't worth as much mitigation as a yellow. Yellow isn't as worth as much as a red. And also, the combat is somewhat similar. There's guns like the LG called the Iron Cannon, there's rockets and rails, all the standards. So if you've ever played or watched Quake 3, you'll have an idea of how the combat should work in Reflex. And it's, I think they've pulled it off quite well. It's very difficult to do, and I think they've done a pretty sterling job of the gameplay elements themselves in Reflex.
So kind of one of the appeals of Reflex is that it takes that classic Quakey sort of gameplay, but it brings it into 2017. So with that comes kind of modern features that modern games expect. The first one is matchmaking, of course. That's a big deal, right? Arena FPS games don't typically have that, not because they don't need it, but because they're old.
Yeah, and really matchmaking is something that I don't think really cropped about until about 2010 or so. So obviously Quake Live coming out around that time, it's like, I want to say StarCraft 2 really was the first big game that brought it out on the PC at least, and now all, I don't say esport games, but like competitive focused multiplayer games have this matchmaking stuff, and it's like a really easy way to get involved with other people, and you don't have to sit looking through server browsers anymore, which for a lot of people, I mean, even for us, right, we use reflex matchmaking when we want to play people who aren't on comms with us, we want to have this quick game. And it's just really convenient. I really enjoy like just pressing a button, like clicking, voting a map, and then you win the game, right? And I think the map thing actually is possibly the most important from my perspective, because like usually what happens, right, you get in a game with a server, you wait for 10 minutes for someone to join, they're like, oh, I want to play Aero Walk, and you don't want to play Aero Walk, but then you kind of have to because they refuse to play any other game. The kind of the matchmaking and the vote system they have on the maps is just a way to quickly get into the game. There's no arguments about what map you want to play. It's just bish bash bosh, and the biggest thing is it's expected from the player base. Like the new players, like a game without matchmaking doesn't feel like a real game, right?
Yeah, it feels like an old game like Quake 3.
Yeah, exactly.
But they also kind of like, they've doubled down on like rankings and stuff, and that kind of drives people on. There's like a leaderboard, and players can, I think the top rank's Prime Overlord or something, and you know, that's a really good feature to have in a game, to give people ranks to climb up and an incentive to play more and improve.
Yeah, there's competitive seasons now. There's a website which you can put in the link with like the top ranks on it, and stuff like that. It's definitely cool. And also you get CP, which may be a bad name for it, right? Competitive points, I think it's called. And then you can buy cool cosmetics with points you've earned from playing ranked games, which is cool. Like it's not really that important at the end of the day. It's just like cosmetics. But some people, especially I think newer players, really get, like, even though you're not necessarily winning a lot of games, you can say like, well, if I play 10 more games I can get this cool golden rocket launcher, and it kind of takes the sting away from your own personal performance a little bit. If there's something else to, like, on the line, if there's something else you can accrue through playing.
Yeah, definitely. There's also a really cool feature kind of in tandem with the matchmaking, which is a spectator feature. So when you load up the game, it has a list of matchmaking games that are already going on, and you can see the level of the players in it, and you can see who the players are, and you just click watch, and it joins you to the server as a spectator, which is
really good.
It's like, lately I've just been, when I'm eating my dinner, I just watch a top player reflex game, and it's really good.
Yeah, and also from like a learning perspective, right? If you're a new player and you're a bit like, how do I kind of get some experience watching people play, it's a really easy way to do it. And you can watch your friends as well. Like, let's say your friends are playing some ranked games, you want to see what's going on. Like, I think you've done that to me a couple of times where I'm playing ranked games on matchmaking and you just come in and spectate. And it's pretty cool to be able to just kind of see what the other player base is doing. These games have always had spectating, but it's one of those features, it's made it easier, right? It's made it easier to spectate. You don't have to browse through the server list, join a spectator. Like, it's just more available to you, and I think that's a really cool thing.
Next up is the map editor. So this has been a huge one throughout the entire development of the game, because just since the map editor was put out, people have been making content for the game. There's been tons and tons. I think there's hundreds and maybe over 1,000 maps on the Reflex Maps site, and people just creating new content all the time. People iterating on the maps change so much. Like, remember how much like Ruins changed, Static Discharge and stuff. Like all these maps have just gone through so many different iterations and stuff, and there's been so much content just because the community was given a tool to make content, and now it's all integrated with the workshop and stuff. It's just it's a really nice feature.
Yeah, it's really cool. And it's talked about a lot, so we don't have to go into a lot of detail of the map editor, but if you're like a budding young mapper and you may be noticing that like games don't produce these SDKs for making maps as much as they used to. It's like harder to get into modding and mapping as a scene these days than it was back in the day. And the fact that Reflex, and I think Diabotical is another one that's doing a map editor, like these kind of indie games providing these tools for players to like make maps for them is invaluable for the actual developers, because it means they don't have to make maps themselves and the community can make their own competitive maps. And then there's another thing where like the community isn't complaining about the quality of the maps that developers are putting out, right? If someone makes a bad map, people won't play it, whereas if the developer makes a bad map, you've got no choice but to play it because that's the only map you've got. It's a really great idea, and like it's just like one of the best features of Reflex, definitely.
Another one that we touched on slightly is the workshop integration. So this just makes everything really handy because you can make maps in Reflex and you can make widgets and custom content and stuff like that. So all of this is kind of pulled through from the workshop to make it super easy.
Yeah. If you want to just like get a different HUD, like maybe you don't want the health to look like, you want it to look like a circle when it ticks down like a clock as you get less health. There's probably a widget for that, and check it out on the workshop. It's like another feature that the ability to modify your HUD has been around since Quake 3, right? I've got my own Quake Live HUD that's modified, but it was such a pain to do, and you have to fiddle around in folders and text files and fiddle around, and it's just not very easy to do. Whereas Reflex, it's dead simple. Go on the workshop, grab it, pull it down, it's done.
Next one is cosmetics. So this is, kind of the cosmetics of Reflex started out a little iffy, and they just improved and improved and improved, and now they've got some really cool ones in there.
Yeah, they've got like an owl head, which is awesome, and like I think there's a kangaroo or something, like a little kangaroo head for your robot.
Yeah, there's like a samurai armor and stuff like that, and these drop randomly. I don't know how often they drop, or if they drop every level or what, but they drop.
I think every week there's like refreshes, and then you get so many drops a week.
It started out with people not looking very different at all, but now everyone's kind of like making their robots look really different to each other, and I hope it kind of thrives into becoming a sort of like trading market, and I hope there's items of varying rarities and stuff like that, because it does wonders for stuff like CSGO and stuff. The final one, and one of the biggest assets towards Reflex as a game, is the amount of community contributors there are, because since the game has been out, there have been people contributing everything from maps to HUDs to just suggestions about balance and stuff and testing and all sorts. Like, the game pretty much lives on the community. Like, the tools are given to us by the devs, and the devs are great people, and they work hard, but everything you're going to be using is coming from the community.
Yeah, and like it's such good community as well. I mean, it's a bit memey and stuff, right? If you're on a Discord, the actual people have stuck with the game since release of the early access, and people have like done tournaments. People have done like maps, widgets. Someone did a rank system, like a league system for like league games and matches and stuff, which was really cool. That's Qualks. Like, there's just so many cool tools, and people are so passionate about the game, and they want it to succeed, and they want to see it do well, and they're not getting anything out of it, right? This is a type of game that they really love, and they want the game to thrive and be accessible to more people, so they're putting their heart and their soul into like supporting it in different ways, and I think it's just really good to see. It's probably one of the most important features, I think, the community, and I think that even if Reflex it jumps in numbers a bit and then it drops back down, I don't think it's ever going to die. I don't think Reflex is going to be a game that we're not going to, even if other games do much better than it in the future, it's still going to have this really cool hardcore community that's dedicated to it, and that's great to see.
Yeah, and even if everyone stops playing, you'll always have Jaguar skills on the server somewhere.
So as a closing section, I and my dear friend Tim here want to kind of encourage you, if you're a person who hasn't got Reflex and you're thinking about getting into the Arena FPS scene, to at least give it a shot, right? At the very least, I think it's definitely worth buying it, and if you don't like it, you can always refund it as a baseline. But why should you do that? I think one of the big things is it's a great entry level for Arena FPS at the moment. There's a lot of new people out there. I've been doing some matchmaking, and I've been meeting a lot of people oh, I'm new, we've got any tips, stuff like that. And also, it has a lot of features in the game, like the tutorial system is really cool, right? It's not necessarily the best tutorial system, but it really, at the very basic fundamental level, it tells you what the weapons do, how they work, a bit of the movement, and a bit of other things. And if you want to expand on that, there's this really cool mode called Race, okay? So you can be like, oh, I want to get better at movement because I'm struggling at movement. Well, check out the race maps. There's Reflex Train, which is really cool, which is Map Premium's put out, which is basically different jumps from different maps kind of stuck together back to back, and you can practice doing them. Some more harder challenge mode type stuff. And there's plenty of other race maps you can just try to kind of enjoy the movement. The movement's one of the best features of this game. I think it's really kind of fluid and nice, and it feels great. So yeah, check out race maps if you're a new player, I'm not very good at strafe jumping. Check out Reflex Train, and then once you've mastered some of the strafe pads and specific jumps on that, go check out other race maps and kind of have fun with that. And also, that's a nice way to relax. Maybe you want to watch a film or something in the background, or listen to a podcast. You don't want to play hardcore duel, but you still want to be playing an Arena FPS. You want to be getting into the mindset. I think that's a really good way of approaching it. But as well as that, like, it's definitely a classic Arena FPS at heart.
It's the same classic gameplay. It's just in a package that's more consumable. People, new players don't want to go into Quake World and jump on a server and negotiate shit with someone and get decked by someone who's 50 times better than them, right? And we don't blame you. So get on Reflex and just do the matchmaking and be landed with someone who's as shit as you are, and then figure the game out in a nice environment.
Yeah, and that is something to definitely emphasize, is you will be shit. And that's okay. When I first started playing Reflex and Arena FPS games, I was awful. Like,
still awful.
I still am awful, right? We're all awful together. It's a hard game. It's harder for more reasons than most people really understand. Like, that's a bonkers thing, right? People are like, oh, it's such a hard game. People are like aiming so well and moving so well. And then there's a whole new depth of like the item control and denying, and also kind of like so many things I couldn't even be bothered to explain it because it would take too long. But there's so much depth to this game that you'll never get bored of it. You'll never master it because it's not been mastered by anyone yet. Like, even the best players in the game are a long way away from exploiting the skill cap, like nowhere near. And they've been playing like CPMA for X amount of years and then Reflex for X amount of years. There's so much depth to it. And depth in a way that a lot of modern esport titles don't really have. I think that's definitely a selling point for the game, right? Like, you're going to be bad, but you've got such a wonderful road to improve on.
And a nice environment to do it in compared to the other existing Arena FPS titles.
Yeah, definitely the best environment to do it in. So that's a good reason to get it, enjoy the game, get better or something. And like, there's a lot of people who are maybe, I don't really want to touch on Quake Champions, but maybe they're like, oh, I don't want a game with heroes. It's not out yet. Maybe if you don't want a game with heroes, but you do want to play Arena FPS, because there are a lot of people like, oh, I wish I could play an Arena FPS game. It's right here, it's Reflex, check it out. This is like classic. It's very classic. It's very kind of vanilla, and I don't mean vanilla in a bad sense, in the sense that like there's no skills, no abilities, no stuff like that added on top of it. It's just a very hardcore like approach to FPS games.
And it kind of carves its niche. Like, even though Reflex has a lot of competition coming up, like it has its niche in the genre. In that, first of all, it's out, and second of all, it's its own thing. Like, you're not going to get a modern game with CPMA style gameplay anymore. Like, that this is the most modern and the most fleshed out game you're going to get, that doubles down on being such a fast paced and like skillfully intensive game.
Yeah,
this is the only one out there for you.
And finally, like, maybe you are like, oh, I want to go pro in Arena FPS games because I think that's the next hot thing that's going to happen. I want to be the next Rafa. Then if you want to be the next Rafa, if you want to be the next like really high level Arena FPS player of the future, I would check out Reflex right now as a way to get into the genre, as a way to like kind of get the idea of strafe jumping, because Diabotical is going to have strafe jumping. It's going to be different, but it's going to have the same similar aspect. It's going to have the same aspect of item control, and same with Quake Champions, right? If you want to be good at any of these Quake-esque games, or even UT, if you want to be good at any of them, Reflex is a really good kind of fundamental learning point, and I think you would do really well in other games if you can master Reflex. So from that perspective, check it out as well.
If you want to be a pro Anarchy main in Quake Champions, and Reflex is the game for you.
Yeah, it's got air control just like Reflex. So yeah, Reflex, it's a good game. Buy it. Or don't. You do you. I don't tell you what to do with your money.
Follow your heart.
Yeah, follow your heart.
But buy it.